During World War II, Nazi Germany tried to weaponize money, not by stealing it, by printing it. Millions of counterfeit British banknotes were produced. They were nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. The goal was not profit, it was economic sabotage. Flood Britain with fake currency, destroy trust in the pound, and destabilize the financial system from the inside. This was not criminal counterfeiting. It was a state-run currency scam designed as economic warfare. The operation had a name, Operation Bernhard. By the early years of World War II, the conflict had expanded far beyond traditional battlefields. Military strength remained critical, but economic stability had become equally important. Modern war required enormous financial resources. Armies required weapons, vehicles, ammunition, and fuel. Factories needed raw materials and labor. Governments financed these systems through taxation, borrowing, and industrial production. Currency stability therefore became a strategic asset. If a nation lost confidence in its money, its economy could weaken rapidly. Britain faced intense financial pressure during the war. After 1939, the British government dramatically increased military spending. Factories were converted to wartime production. Millions of workers shifted into military and industrial roles. Government borrowing expanded to sustain the war effort. Large quantities of bonds were issued to finance defense spending. The British pound remained one of the most important currencies in global finance. Before the war, it functioned as a central trading currency across international markets. Confidence in the pound supported British imports and wartime purchasing power. Maintaining that confidence became a national priority. Nazi Germany studied these financial vulnerabilities carefully. German strategists recognized that modern war involved more than military confrontation. Economic systems could also become targets. If confidence in the British pound collapsed, the consequences could spread quickly. Trade could slow. Prices could become unstable. Banks might struggle to maintain liquidity. Even rumors about currency instability could damage public trust. Economic warfare therefore became part of German strategic planning. German intelligence agencies examined ways to disrupt Allied financial systems. Traditional sabotage focused on factories and transportation networks, but financial sabotage offered a different kind of weapon. Instead of attacking soldiers, it targeted the foundations of financial stability. Within Nazi leadership circles, this concept attracted attention. It promised a way to weaken Britain without direct military confrontation. The strategy was ambitious and technically difficult, but the possibility of economic disruption made it attractive. The idea would soon evolve into a concrete operational plan. By 1941, Nazi leadership began exploring unconventional methods of economic warfare. Germany faced its own financial pressures as the war expanded across Europe. Military campaigns required massive industrial production. Resources were stretched across multiple fronts. Strategists inside the SS began examining the vulnerability of Allied currencies. The British pound became a primary target. It remained widely trusted in international trade. Large parts of the global financial system still relied on it. If that trust weakened, the effects could spread quickly. German intelligence services began studying British banknotes closely. They collected examples of different denominations. Analysts examined the paper, ink, engraving, and serial numbering systems. Replicating the currency would require exceptional technical precision. This was not a typical criminal counterfeiting effort. It required state-level resources and coordination. The project eventually came under the supervision of the SS. The operation was placed within the Reich Security Main Office. SS Major Bernhard Kruger was assigned to lead the program. Kruger had experience managing complex technical operations. His assignment was straightforward in theory: produce counterfeit British pounds that were indistinguishable from genuine notes. If the notes could pass through banks and businesses undetected, they could circulate widely. The goal was not simply to create money, it was to destabilize confidence in the currency itself. If Britain faced uncertainty about its banknotes, financial stability could weaken. German planners considered several possible uses for the forged currency. One proposal involved flooding Britain with counterfeit notes. Aircraft could potentially drop banknotes over British cities. If large quantities entered circulation, inflation could accelerate. Even rumors about counterfeit currency might trigger panic. Banks would face pressure to verify the authenticity of deposits. Merchants might begin rejecting high-denomination notes. The psychological impact could spread beyond the immediate financial damage. Other planners suggested using the currency in international markets. Counterfeit pounds could finance intelligence operations abroad. Agents could purchase supplies, equipment, and information. The forged notes could fund espionage networks across Europe. This approach required extremely convincing banknotes. Even trained financial professionals would need to accept them as genuine. The project therefore required specialists. Printers, engravers, and paper experts would be needed. German authorities began searching for individuals with these skills. Many of them were prisoners. Inside concentration camps, skilled craftsmen and technicians could be found. The SS believed these prisoners could be forced to produce the currency. By 1942, the planning phase was complete. The project would soon move into full-scale production. By 1942, the counterfeiting project moved from planning to execution. The SS selected Sachsenhausen concentration camp as the operational site. Sachsenhausen was located north of Berlin. It already contained facilities capable of supporting specialized workshops. A section of the camp was isolated for the project. This secured compound became the center of the operation. The SS began selecting prisoners with specific technical skills. Engravers, printers, artists, and bankers were identified. Many of them had professional backgrounds before the war. Some had worked in printing houses. Others had experience in banking or document production. These prisoners were transferred into the isolated workshop area. Unlike most prisoners, they were given slightly improved living conditions. The SS needed them healthy enough to perform detailed work. Inside the workshop, the prisoners began studying British banknotes. Every detail had to be analyzed carefully. British pounds contained complex engraving patterns. The paper itself contained unique fibers and watermarks. Serial numbers followed strict numbering systems. Even the ink formulas required replication. The prisoners worked under constant supervision. Armed guards monitored the facility at all times. Despite the conditions, the technical work demanded precision. Engravers began reproducing the intricate printing plates. These plates were used to replicate the visual design of the notes. At the same time, specialists experimented with paper production. British banknotes used distinctive rag-based paper. The prisoners attempted to recreate similar material. This required adjusting fiber mixtures and paper thickness. Watermarks were particularly difficult to duplicate. They required carefully controlled pressure during paper formation. Each experimental batch was tested against genuine British notes. The goal was near-perfect visual accuracy. Once printing began, the process resembled an industrial operation. Printing presses ran continuously inside the workshop. Sheets of counterfeit currency moved through multiple stages of production. Each stage required inspection and correction. Errors could expose the entire operation. Serial numbering became another critical challenge. The notes needed realistic numbering sequences. If duplicates appeared, banks might detect the fraud. Teams of prisoners tracked the numbering patterns carefully. Gradually, the quality improved. By late 1942, the forged notes were approaching convincing accuracy. The SS leadership began reviewing the results. They needed confirmation that the notes could pass as genuine currency. Only then could the operation move to its next phase. By late 1942, the success of the operation depended entirely on technical accuracy. British banknotes were among the most sophisticated currencies of the time. Their design included complex engraving patterns intended to prevent counterfeiting. These patterns contained thousands of fine intersecting lines. Even slight mistakes could reveal a forgery. The prisoners assigned to the operation studied the notes under magnification. They compared every curve, line, and spacing detail. Engraving plates had to replicate these patterns precisely. One small error could compromise an entire batch. The ink composition also required careful replication. British currency used specialized ink mixtures that aged in predictable ways. If the color tone appeared incorrect, the notes might attract suspicion. Paper production presented another technical challenge. British banknotes were printed on rag-based paper containing cotton fibers. This material produced a distinctive texture and durability. The prisoners experimented with different fiber combinations. They adjusted pulp mixtures repeatedly until the paper resembled the original. Another critical feature was the watermark. Watermarks were embedded into the paper during manufacturing. They became visible only when the note was held against light. Reproducing this feature required extremely careful pressure control during papermaking. Several early attempts failed to achieve the correct clarity. Eventually, the prisoners refined the technique. The new watermark began to resemble the British original closely. Serial numbers introduced another layer of complexity. Each banknote required a unique number. These numbers followed structured sequences used by the Bank of England. Duplicate sequences would immediately reveal the forgery. Prisoners assigned to numbering studied large sets of genuine notes. They mapped patterns used by British printing facilities. Using these patterns, they generated realistic serial sequences. Quality control became an essential stage of the operation. Every printed sheet was inspected under bright lighting. Notes that contained small imperfections were destroyed. The SS demanded extremely high standards. Their goal was not merely functional currency. The notes needed to survive professional inspection inside banks. By early 1943, the counterfeit pounds had reached remarkable quality. Some samples were reportedly tested against genuine notes. Even trained observers struggled to distinguish them. The operation had achieved something unusual, a counterfeit currency nearly identical to the real one. The next challenge would be determining how to use it. By 1943, the operation had produced a growing supply of counterfeit British pounds. The next challenge was distribution. Printing the notes was only part of the strategy. For the operation to succeed, the currency needed to enter circulation. German planners initially considered a dramatic method. Aircraft could drop large quantities of banknotes over Britain. If millions of pounds appeared suddenly, the public might begin spending them. Banks would quickly receive unfamiliar notes. Verification systems could become overwhelmed. The sudden appearance of large volumes of currency might trigger panic. People might begin questioning whether the pound could be trusted. In theory, this could destabilize the British financial system. However, the plan contained practical problems. Dropping banknotes from aircraft risked immediate detection. Authorities could quickly collect the currency before it circulated widely. German planners therefore examined alternative strategies. One option involved using the counterfeit British pounds in international markets. German intelligence networks operated across occupied Europe. Agents needed reliable currency to finance operations. Counterfeit pounds could serve this purpose. They were widely accepted outside Britain. Many international traders trusted the British pound. This made it useful for purchasing goods and services abroad. The forged currency could fund espionage activities. Agents could pay informants, purchase equipment, and finance travel. Another use involved black market transactions. Wartime shortages had created underground trading networks. Currency moved through these markets with limited verification. Counterfeit notes could circulate more easily in these environments. German authorities began releasing some of the forged notes gradually. They entered financial channels through intermediaries. In some cases, the currency funded intelligence missions. In other cases, it supported covert purchases in neutral countries. Despite these uses, the large-scale economic attack never fully occurred. The aircraft distribution plan remained mostly theoretical. Instead, the operation became a financial resource for German intelligence. By the end of the war, millions of pounds had been printed. The total value of counterfeit notes eventually exceeded £130 million. At the time, this represented an enormous sum. The operation had succeeded technically. The currency could circulate without immediate detection. But the original strategic objective had not yet been realized. The economic impact remained uncertain.
Currency stability is one of the foundations of a modern economy. People accept banknotes because they trust their value. That trust allows transactions to occur quickly. Merchants accept money without verifying every detail. Banks process deposits without questioning every note. This confidence keeps economic activity moving. During wartime, that trust becomes even more important. Governments must borrow large sums of money. Military spending requires constant financial support. If the currency loses credibility, borrowing becomes harder. Prices may begin to rise unpredictably. Inflation can spread across markets. The British pound held a central role in international finance. Even during World War II, it remained widely accepted. Many countries used pounds for trade settlements. Foreign governments held reserves in British currency. This global trust made the pound strategically valuable. German planners believed counterfeit currency could weaken that trust. If large volumes of forged notes circulated, confidence might erode. Banks might become cautious about accepting deposits. Merchants might hesitate before accepting high-value notes. Even rumors about counterfeiting could damage confidence. Financial panic does not require complete collapse. Sometimes uncertainty alone can slow economic activity. If businesses began questioning the currency, trade could suffer. Government financing might become more expensive. Interest rates could increase as investors demanded protection. International partners might reconsider holding British reserves. The effects could spread beyond Britain itself. Financial instability could weaken wartime logistics. Supplies purchased abroad depended on currency credibility. Ships carrying imported materials required trusted payment. Without that trust, procurement could slow. German strategists viewed this vulnerability as an opportunity. They hoped counterfeit notes might quietly enter circulation. If discovered gradually, the damage could accumulate over time. Markets might struggle to distinguish genuine notes from forged ones. Verification systems in banks could become overloaded. Financial institutions would need to inspect currency more carefully. That extra scrutiny could slow transactions. The British government understood these risks clearly. Maintaining confidence in the pound became a strategic priority. Banking institutions monitored suspicious notes carefully. The Bank of England developed systems to identify counterfeit currency. Despite the potential threat, the British system proved resilient. Trust in the pound remained largely intact throughout the war. But the possibility of disruption demonstrated something important. Modern economies depend heavily on trust in money, and that trust can become a strategic target during conflict. Despite its technical success, Operation Bernhard faced several operational limits. Producing convincing banknotes required time and skilled labor. The printing workshops inside Sachsenhausen could not expand indefinitely.
Only a limited number of specialists were available. Each sheet of currency required careful inspection before release. This slowed overall production. Distribution created an even larger challenge. The original concept involved flooding Britain with counterfeit notes. However, transporting large quantities into the country proved difficult. The Royal Air Force controlled much of the airspace over Britain. Any aircraft attempting to drop banknotes risked interception. Even if the notes reached British cities, authorities could quickly respond. Police and banks would likely collect suspicious currency. The operation therefore shifted toward smaller distribution channels. German intelligence services began using the notes selectively. Counterfeit pounds financed covert operations abroad. Agents operating in neutral countries used the currency for purchases. Some notes entered black market trading networks. These markets were less regulated and easier to infiltrate. However, this limited distribution reduced the economic impact. The currency circulated, but not in the massive volumes originally envisioned. Another limitation came from the war itself. By 1943 and 1944, Germany faced increasing military pressure. Allied bombing campaigns damaged industrial infrastructure. Transportation networks inside Germany became less reliable. Resources needed for the printing operation became harder to secure. Paper supplies and technical materials faced shortages. The SS continued supervising the program, but priorities shifted. Military emergencies began dominating strategic planning. Allied forces also advanced steadily across Europe. German leadership began focusing on defense rather than offensive operations. Under these conditions, Operation Bernhard lost strategic urgency. The counterfeit currency remained useful for intelligence funding, but the large-scale economic attack against Britain never materialized. Instead, the program became a specialized financial tool. The workshops continued producing notes into the later years of the war. By 1945, the project had generated enormous quantities of counterfeit currency, yet most of it had never entered the British economy. The operation demonstrated remarkable technical capability, but logistical constraints prevented the strategy from achieving its original objective. Even carefully engineered economic attacks require effective delivery systems. Without distribution, the most sophisticated currency forgery remains limited in impact. By early 1945, the war in Europe was approaching its final phase. German military positions were collapsing across multiple fronts. Allied forces were advancing steadily into German territory. Inside the Reich, many secret programs faced sudden disruption. Operation Bernhard was among them. The counterfeit workshops inside Sachsenhausen continued operating during the final months, but the SS leadership understood the situation was deteriorating. As Allied forces moved closer, the future of the operation became uncertain. German authorities began preparing contingency plans. Large quantities of counterfeit currency had already been produced. These notes represented years of technical effort. Allowing them to fall into Allied hands could reveal the entire operation. SS officers began ordering the evacuation of materials. Printing equipment and finished notes were removed from the workshops. The counterfeit currency was packed into sealed containers. These containers were transported south through Austria. The goal was concealment rather than distribution. Several shipments were taken toward remote alpine regions. One destination was the Toplitz-like area in Austria. This isolated location provided deep water and limited access. German units transported crates of banknotes to the lake. Witnesses later described trucks arriving with sealed boxes. During the final days of the war, these crates were dumped into the water. The intention was to destroy evidence of the counterfeiting program. As Germany surrendered in May 1945, Allied investigators began uncovering fragments of the operation. Documents recovered from abandoned facilities hinted at a large-scale currency project. Former prisoners from Sachsenhausen described the printing workshops. Investigators began connecting these testimonies with recovered materials. Over time, evidence revealed the scale of the project. Millions of counterfeit pounds had been produced. Some of the forged notes had already circulated across Europe. The operation had lasted several years. The discovery surprised many Allied financial officials. Few had imagined such a sophisticated state-run counterfeiting effort. Search teams eventually located some of the dumped materials. Diving expeditions recovered crates from Toplitz Lake. Inside were bundles of counterfeit British banknotes. Additional documents confirmed the details of Operation Bernhard. The program had combined technical precision with forced labor. It represented one of the most complex counterfeiting operations ever attempted. The war had ended before its full economic impact could be realized, but its discovery revealed how financial systems had become targets of wartime strategy. Operation Bernhard had transformed currency into a weapon, and its exposure showed how economic warfare could operate in secrecy.
When the details of Operation Bernhard became known after the war, financial authorities reacted cautiously. The Bank of England faced a difficult problem. Millions of counterfeit pounds had been produced during the operation. Although many notes had been destroyed or hidden, some had circulated internationally. Banks could not be certain how many remained in circulation. This created a potential risk for the British currency system. Confidence in the pound depended on certainty about authenticity. If large quantities of counterfeit notes continued circulating, trust could weaken. British financial officials began reviewing the situation immediately after the war. Investigators examined recovered counterfeit notes carefully. The quality of the forgery surprised many experts. Some notes were nearly indistinguishable from genuine currency. This raised concerns for long-term financial stability. The Bank of England therefore considered several responses. One option involved redesigning British banknotes entirely. A new design could invalidate the existing counterfeit stock. However, such a change would be complex and expensive. Britain was already facing major economic reconstruction challenges. Another approach involved withdrawing certain high-value banknotes from circulation. The Bank of England decided to focus on the £5 note. This denomination had been heavily targeted by the counterfeit operation. Authorities announced the withdrawal of existing £5 notes. Banks were instructed to exchange them for newly issued versions. This process allowed officials to remove suspicious notes from circulation. The redesign included improved security features. Watermarks and printing methods were adjusted to prevent similar counterfeiting attempts. Financial institutions also strengthened verification procedures. Banks became more cautious when accepting large quantities of cash. Currency inspection became more systematic. International partners were also informed about the counterfeit program. Foreign banks began examining British banknotes more carefully. Despite the scale of the operation, the long-term damage remained limited. The British financial system proved resilient. Most counterfeit notes had never reached widespread circulation. The rapid response by financial authorities helped maintain confidence. Economic recovery after the war gradually stabilized the pound. However, Operation Bernhard left an important lesson for central banks. Currency security required constant innovation. Anti-counterfeiting technology became a permanent priority. Central banks began investing more resources into banknote protection. Modern currency design increasingly focused on security features. The episode demonstrated how financial systems could become strategic targets. Even sophisticated economies could face risks from currency manipulation. Maintaining trust in money required constant vigilance.
Operation Bernhard raises questions that extend beyond financial strategy. The project combined technical innovation with human coercion. The counterfeit currency was produced inside a concentration camp. The workers responsible for printing the notes were prisoners. Many had been selected for their professional skills. Some had worked as printers before the war. Others had experience in banking or document design. The SS forced these prisoners to replicate British currency. Their work was highly technical and required precision. At the same time, they remained prisoners under constant surveillance. Guards monitored every stage of the process. The workers understood that mistakes could carry severe consequences. Despite these conditions, the prisoners performed remarkably complex tasks. They recreated banknote designs that challenged financial experts. Some prisoners later described the situation as morally ambiguous. Their technical success improved their chances of survival. The SS valued their expertise. This provided them slightly better living conditions than other prisoners. Yet they were still contributing to a wartime operation. Their work supported a strategy designed to destabilize another nation's economy. This created an unusual ethical tension. The prisoners had little choice in the matter. Refusal could result in punishment or execution. Participation offered the possibility of survival. After the war, historians examined this dilemma carefully. Operation Bernhard blurred the line between criminal activity and state policy. Traditional counterfeiting is considered financial crime, but this operation was authorized by a government. It was designed as an instrument of economic warfare. In wartime, governments often adopt unconventional strategies. Economic blockades, trade restrictions, and currency manipulation are examples. Operation Bernhard represented an extreme version of these tactics. It attempted to weaponize trust in money. The involvement of forced labor added another layer of complexity. The prisoners who produced the currency were victims of the regime, yet their technical work became central to the operation. Post-war discussions sometimes focused on whether the project could be considered espionage or fraud. The answer depends partly on how economic warfare is defined. Governments frequently target infrastructure during war. Financial systems can be considered part of that infrastructure. If money itself becomes a weapon, the boundaries of warfare expand. Operation Bernhard therefore occupies an unusual place in history. It was both a technological achievement and a moral contradiction. The operation demonstrated how wartime strategies can transform financial systems into instruments of conflict.
Operation Bernhard did not collapse the British economy. The war ended before the operation reached its intended scale. Yet the program revealed an important structural pattern. Financial systems can become targets during conflict. Modern economies depend heavily on trust in currency. That trust allows trade, banking, and government finance to function. If confidence weakens, the entire system becomes vulnerable. Operation Bernhard attempted to exploit that vulnerability. It targeted the psychological foundation of money. Currency works because people believe it will be accepted by others. Once that belief is questioned, stability can erode quickly. Governments therefore invest heavily in protecting their currencies. Security features in banknotes are one layer of protection. Central banks also monitor financial circulation constantly. However, threats do not always come from criminals alone. Sometimes the threat comes from governments themselves. State power can provide resources unavailable to ordinary criminals. Operation Bernhard used the machinery of a state. Printing facilities, intelligence services, and military logistics supported the project. These capabilities allowed the counterfeiting operation to reach unprecedented scale. Few criminal networks could replicate such coordination. This illustrates a broader pattern in financial history. Some of the most powerful financial disruptions originate from states. Governments control monetary policy. They regulate financial institutions. They also possess the authority to manipulate currency systems. When that authority is used strategically, the effects can be profound. Economic warfare has appeared in many forms. Blockades attempt to restrict trade. Sanctions attempt to isolate economies. Currency manipulation attempts to destabilize financial confidence.
Operation Bernhard represents one of the most direct examples. It attempted to undermine a national currency through mass counterfeiting. The plan relied on the assumption that trust could be engineered downward. Even though the strategy never reached full scale, the concept remains instructive. Financial systems remain deeply dependent on credibility. Central banks protect that credibility through regulation and transparency, but the fundamental vulnerability remains. Money is ultimately a shared agreement about value. If that agreement breaks down, economic stability can weaken rapidly. This is why modern financial institutions invest heavily in security and oversight. The lessons of Operation Bernhard extend far beyond World War II. They demonstrate how trust can become a strategic target, and they reveal how financial systems can become instruments of conflict. When trust becomes a target, finance becomes a battlefield.